Nelli Shkolnikova is not a name that commonly we hear as a great violinist of the 20th century, even though she was actually one of the best. It's a bit how life isn't always lucky to everyone. She started playing the violin very young. She was a student of Yuri Yankelevich, and she was actually one of his first students. He later would teach 35 first prize winners in international competitions in 20th century. First prize winners. He was a great teacher, and she was one of his first students when he was quite young and still starting out as an assistant at the Moscow Conservatory. And she came to him. She practically lived even, with his family because she was 8 and 9, and it was a situation her parents weren't there to be with her. And he prepared her for the Jacques Thibaud Competition, one of the most prestigious violin competitions at the time, in 1953, which she carried away the first prize. And she, after that, there were many great violinists there. They proposed to her all these concerts and tours and, everything which would be the start of an incredible international career. But this was the Soviet Union. And at that time, you didn't have the right to leave a country if you didn't want to. You didn't have the right to play where you wanted to. Everything was run by the state. So after the concert, she went back to Moscow, and she was not allowed to participate in any of those concerts. She was not allowed to leave. She was allowed to do the concert she was told to do. She was Jewish. She was a woman. They had their political reasons for allowing some artists to play and others not. Nonetheless, she had actually a very successful career in Soviet Union. She was recorded, made many recordings. She played with the top orchestras, but it wasn't always the nice life. In the 70s in particular, it was very difficult. They would send her to play concerts. I mean, not only her, many artists were in the same situation. Somewhere in a village in Siberia where they were expecting a circus troupe. They had an upright, out-of-tune piano, and she would prepare a program of Beethoven sonatas, and this was the reality she was faced with. And as she was telling us, she didn't know what to do. She was really considering how she could live a life like this, a concert violinist of this level in these conditions. And in 1982, I think it was, by chance, there was a mistake made by somebody who was working at the office who would make the decisions of who would play which concerts. Someone came, a young lady, and she didn't know that Nelli Shkolnikova was not allowed to leave the Soviet Union. And there was a cancellation. There was a concert in Berlin, and she called, and West Berlin, yeah. And she was proposed it to Nelli. And Nelli realized at the time that was her chance. That was the only chance she had. She didn't tell almost anybody, not her husband, that would have not worked. She didn't have any kids. She was already over 50. She played the concert, and that night she left with her violin, and she didn't return to the hotel. And when we were in his studio, there's some photos. She had that poster of that concert. That was the concert she played. And after that, she defected, meaning that she escaped. She had people who helped her. And she left everything behind. But she had her freedom. So after that, she had some friends in Australia. She moved to Australia. Isaac Stern remembered her playing and always loved her playing. And he also helped her later. I mean, she was not at the age to have a solo career that she should have had, 40 years before. But she taught at Indiana University in Bloomington, which is where all of us met her. And she was an amazing teacher, and we can...
I wanted to add a little bit that after the competition in 1953, even though she was not allowed to have a big career, she was allowed several tours in the West, and particularly in Australia. She had several big tours in Australia. That's why when she defected in 82, she went first to Australia because she had connections there. She also toured the United States and Europe. She played in the West, but not as much as artists like Oistrakh or Kogan. That's why she did have some connections, and she managed to escape. Yes.
Can I please add something? Mm-hmm. Because I talked to Nelli she talked to me about it, and she was very direct with me, and she basically said that she could have gone more outside of Russia. If it's actually started like that. When I knew Nelli, she was already quite old and she was quite big, let's say. And Nelli said to me one time, you know, Elliot, when I was young, I was actually quite beautiful. and then she started talking about her career, and basically she said it very direct. She was not allowed to play outside because she wouldn't have sex with some people of politicians. That's what she told in her own words. So she was a very proud woman, and you know, if it was against her principle, then she would just not do it, even for her career.
She had so much integrity. I mean, I think that was one of the things that we all remember. She would be direct. There was no bullshit with her. Whatever she would say, sometimes it would come off, especially when you didn't know her yet, as a little bit rough. So I remember at the beginning we were all a little bit, well, I don't know all, but it was a little bit scary. I mean, you know, coming in but it was not because she wanted to be scary. She was just direct. She didn't, you know, beat about the bush. She just said exactly how it was.
She didn't sugarcoat everything.
Anything.
So, like, when I came, it was 96 or 97, to audition for IU, and I played for her, she told me right away, you can't play violin, but I'll teach you. That was the result of the audition, which was pretty good, I think.
Yeah, that's. Anyone want to pass around?
Speaking of directness, I have a one funny story. So, eventually, I made my way to Charleston, and I had my debut concerto with orchestra, and the reviewer was. It was a very nice review, and she already lived in Australia. After Bloomington, Nelli retired, went back to Australia because she had a lot of friends there, and it was a really nice community, and that's where she wanted to retire after finishing her years at Indiana. By that time, I was already in Charleston, and I sent her the review and followed up with a phone call to Australia 2 days later. She said, yes, I read your review. But the way you played your audition to Indiana University, and with the way you played, I never expected you to go so far. And you probably didn't either, right? You know, I know. I think there was another violinist who said, I think Yulia told me. She said, Nelli, I got a new job in York Philharmonic. Well, I hope it's not your last job.
She said the same thing to me, like, I'm so sorry for you going to the opera. I never thought you're gonna end up in the opera, something like that. This is when I got the job
In the opera.
In the opera.
One of the best companies.
And also to follow up a little bit on the word rough, it seemed to be rough. I went to study with Nelli after I heard a friend of mine playing amazingly, and I said, who did you study with? It's unbelievable. Olga Polonsky, we met in Boston. So I'm like, oh, you play unbelievable, so good. Who do you study with? Nelli Shkolnikova. I want to study with her. Please introduce me. She said, well, look, there were moments when I would run out of the class and the stand would fly behind. You know, so Nelli would just throw the stand behind if you were not prepared, of course.
But it was funny because she had no idea she would have this effect. And when my mom came to visit for the first time in Bloomington, you know, went for dinner, and she's like, you know, Nelli Fimovna, that's the polite way to say in Russian, you know that your students are a bit scared of you. What? They're scared of me? Why are they scared of me? And she was just so shocked, and it was so scary to see her reaction. I was like, it's okay. But she had no idea because it came from honesty for her. She was so honest. But when you're a student and you want to learn, you need honesty, because that way you learn. You don't want someone to say, yeah, that was nice when it wasn't, because then you're not going to work on that part. So this is what made us want to play better, because we realized when you got to know her a little bit, you realize there was nothing mean about her. She just wanted to be efficient and make you play better. And this is why, you know, we wanted to do our best.
I wanted to say, so I was actually just talking to a couple of students about this same anecdote. So I had just gotten to Bloomington, and of course very excited to be in her class and to play for her. And I had asked her before, 1 week before when I was signing up for the classes, Maestro, what should I play for you? And she says, oh, whatever you want, a movement of a concerto, some Bach, some Etude, whatever you want, it's not a problem. So I prepared everything. In that week, I prepared first movement like Tchaikovsky, I prepared a whole Bach sonata, I prepared 2 or 3 Etudes, and I get there, and she gets there in the morning, she says, okay, well, nice to meet you, whatever, all right, please play something. What would you, Bach, whatever. Okay, fine. So I start to play the prelude of G minor, and I go like this. She goes, stop. Federico, I think we need to talk. And she asked me, do you know Shradik? So then we started to work, and so for a couple of months, and that's all we did, just Sevcik, Shradik, and finally my first piece was Vitaly Chacon. And
Many of us played Vitaly Chacon with Nelli.
And I was so excited to finally play this first piece. And I to be honest, I was a good student. The teacher told me to do this, and I did it. And she said, you need to practice this, and so I did it. And I really wanted to learn, so I really practiced hard. And I got there to the studio, playing this piece. I had it by memory already with the pianist, thinking, that okay, she'll be happy. And I finished playing. And this is where the directness comes, and there's no meanness. She's just, let's not waste time. So I finished playing, and the only thing she said to me in that moment was, Federico, it's good, but it's all wrong. And I actually cried afterwards. I went home and I cried because, I'd spent so much of my, energy and emotion to really doing it the right way, thinking, and I didn't understand in the moment what that meant. How can that be good but all wrong? Yeah, and it's spending time with her, and because she was so direct that she would really tell you what that meant afterwards. It was just, she was maybe not the most diplomatic person, so it came out like that, But then she would explain, it's like, look, if to play tense you have to do like that with your hand, then it's not efficient. If you have to do like this with your bow to play staccato or to play, what it means is like you need one healthy technique to be able to play everything, and then playing right will also be good, or good will also be right, and you'll be able to have a long career and not suffer from tendonitis. So thank God that she was so direct in that way.
Yeah, this idea that she would say неправильно, it's not right. I heard it a lot. Another anecdote. So once she already moved to Australia and she was sick, she was like 8 months before she died. I went to visit her in Melbourne. And we went to a concert of Repin. Vadim Repin. I blanked on the name. And I know him personally a little bit. So I called him, I think, and I told him that I'm coming to the concert with Nelli Shkolnikova. She's not well, and she would like to meet you after the concert. So he played Tchaikovsky concerto with the orchestra, Melbourne, whatever, Philharmonic, I don't know. And after it was done, Nelli was in a wheelchair, we went to see him at the green room. And in very characteristic Nelli's way, she started teaching him how to play Tchaikovsky concerto. And she was like, Vadim, the tempo change, when you go from whatever the second theme or whatever, I don't remember exactly what she said, but like, you cannot change the tempo this extremely. The orchestra cannot follow you. And he was actually super nice, and he was polite, and he was smiling, and saying yes. It was extremely funny how she immediately went into her teaching mode and started telling him what to do and what not to do in Tchaikovsky concerto. That was kind of, yeah.
We once, with Sasha, we took Nelli to see a concert with the Indianapolis Symphony with a new winner of the Indianapolis violin competition, a guy by the name Barnabas Kelemen. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a wonderful violinist. And he played one of the Prokofiev concertos. So we also had to, on a drive home. She didn't care to teach him, was a second concerto, but she did tell us everything she thought about that guy on the drive home. We had about an hour to get back to Bloomington. We heard everything, but she didn't offer any advice for him. But one of my stories about being scared of Nelli, I had to prepare. I had to play one of the it was like junior recital, and the dress rehearsal went terribly. I was all like nerves, and I think she sensed it. And the thing that I will never forget, she said, "Well, I don't even have to come to your recital. I told you everything that needs to be done, and just go and play. I won't be there. Just play." So later that evening, I had a concert, my concert, and we have a little like a dressing room area in one of the concert halls at IU, and so people lined up after the concert, and the very last person who I see is Nelli standing there, but I was sure, I could swear she was not at the concert because I scanned the room to make sure she's not there before. And believe it or not, so this lady in her 70s by that, because our year was the very last year of her teaching at Bloomington before she moved. She stood on her feet behind the door and listened to the concert behind the door, standing the whole hour, so that I don't see her, so I don't get nervous at the concert. Yeah, so every time I think about it, I can't not cry because obviously, it's just, but it shows you everything about her human qualities too. So
I'd like to talk, if I may, about her violinistic qualities. And, that's a little bit how I met her. I was a student in Rotterdam Conservatory with Ilya Grubert, who was actually also a student of her, but I did not know it because he was officially a student of Kogan. And one day I play for my teacher, Ilya, and I play a spiccato passage. And spiccato was really never my forte. So then he looked at me and he said, "I'm afraid you're going to have to go to Indiana." And I'm like, "What's in Indiana?" And then Nelli Shkolnikova teaches in Bloomington. And I had never, ever heard of her. And, I'm certainly in my young years, I was a violin freak, as much as Dima Sitkovetsky or even more. So all these old violinists, I had all the recordings, everything, but I did not know Nelli Shkolnikova at all. So I didn't meet her in Indiana right away. I first did a masterclass in Spain. So I entered the room and I see her, I didn't know how she looked. So, it was quite a surprise to see her like that. And then, I had already lessons with famous people. And then, I played for her. And then she started playing the violin. And I just could not believe my ears. I just couldn't. Because, I had heard many great violinists also in concerts, Perlman, Vengerov, and then, Igor Roystra, who was one of my teachers and all that. But I never had experienced such purity in everything what she was doing. There are some violinists with great personality, with a lot of personality. I can't say she was one of these violinists, but what she was doing was just perfect. And if it was just a simple legato, she had this incredible technique, and it just sounded so beautiful. So everything what she did, and I tell you, when she was playing for me, she actually was playing a Paganini Caprice, and she was already quite old, and it was so perfect, so beautiful, so pure.
Do you remember which one?
Ninth. And at that moment, because I had the possibility to study with Boris Kushnir, he had accepted me in his class in Vienna, I think. But I just went to Nelli because I heard, I really want to learn from her, It was just so, and I didn't know her at all, but I was just blown away by her playing, like so much I couldn't believe it.
To add to that, what's special is that you come to a teacher, right, and she can demonstrate, just play for you a passage you have trouble with, and it always sounds so perfect and so nuanced. And just so ideal and so beautiful, just as you said. And one funny part, sometimes she said, "Oh, look, Okay, I'll play for you. This is how it sounds. But look, I can't play very well.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, you know, I have arthritis. I cannot play anymore. And then okay, Paganini, Isai, perfect.
Exactly. I remember. It's okay. I wanted to say also about the Spiccato. It was so funny. So when I went to audition for her, I played the Paganini Fifth Caprice in there, and I was so nervous, you know, that I was just completely tight. And I said, okay, the bow's never going to bounce like that. So I just pressed down and just go. And so I don't even remember how I played. I just know it took a minute and a half, and that's it. You know? And then, you know, and then she came to talk to me afterwards at the end, and she goes, okay, Federico, there's, you know, some things, you know, but, and then with a very sad face, she looks at me, but I'm so sorry, you don't have Spiccato? I just thought that was so funny. And then afterwards, so, you know, during all of this technique that we did, you know, we went through all of the don't etudes, and I always had my lesson, the first one in the morning. I'd like to be in the morning and then to be free. And so she would always get there, and it would be cold in Bloomington.
Was
it
your
would be
lesson at 10:15?
Maybe even
before,
yeah?
That was right after now.
Just kidding. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. And, you know, so in Bloomington it was cold. It was like, you know, minus 20 sometimes or below. And so she would get there, and of course she had, you know, arthritis or whatever, and her violin would sleep in IU. She would not take her violin home. It would always be in this cupboard, and the cupboard would be locked, you know. So she would get there, and she would walk in, and she would, okay, good morning, and she would just get into her sofa, and she would go like this, like that, you know? And so you would feel really bad if she ever had to get up and open the cupboard to get her violin, you know. So you really wanted to play well, and I remember I was doing one of these, the last dons, you know, which is really tricky and technical, with 6 going to 10s to 6 going to 10s, 6 going to 10s. And she's looking at me, and she's with these eyes saying, "You're really going to make me get up." Okay. And so she gets up slowly, and she opens the cupboard, and she opens the violin, and you hear the strings, they're kind of out of tune, you know. And like she told Yuri, it's like she's already saying, "Look, I'll show you how it's done, but be gentle with your comments, you know, I'm old, I have arthritis or whatever." And it was absolutely perfect, with the strings completely out of tune, and all of the 6, all of the 10s, and all of the legato and everything. And I was just there, you know, with drool, you know, just drooling. And so she's not even looking at me while she's doing it. She's no. Yeah. And then tired, she puts the violin back in the case. She's like, "You see, you got it, okay." And then she would go back, you know. But yeah, she was amazing. Even at, you know, her last playing, you know, stages, you know, so pure, so beautiful, always beauty, always. Yeah.
I remember about her playing. So she would always say that before showing anything, that she hasn't practiced for 8 years or 9 years or whatever. And one way, so like I remember a number of times, like she would check, you know, if the if the violin is set up correctly, you know, if the distances between notes are okay. So she would play octaves. She wouldn't play fifths. She would play octaves to see if it's in tune. If it's in tune, then the violin is set up correctly. If it's not in tune, then the violin is not set up correctly. And one of the, you know, impressive things that I practiced, you know, Paganini number 17 with the finger octaves. It's really difficult. And you know, she would say, "Oh, I haven't practiced for 9 years or whatever," and she would play it perfectly. It was like unbelievable.
I just wanted to talk about the etudes, because compared to the other teachers at IU, often, you know, freshmen would come and, you know, they'll be playing maybe a few etudes and a piece, and maybe this didn't apply to everyone, but definitely to me and to other students in my in the same shape when I came. I mean, there were no etudes. There were open strings for literally 2 or 3 months. Maybe then you could get a scale. Maybe then you could start the etudes. And so it was, you know, a big shock for some people. I loved it. I was like, great, now I actually will have the time, because this is the time you could actually do this work. But then for the etudes, it was literally not like, let's choose this one for this. It was like, okay, Kreutzer, number 1, number 2. Every single etude in order, and it would have a little check when it was done, and you were waiting for that pencil that it was done, and then it was Rode. every single one in order. Then don't. Every single one in order. It wasn't like, let's do this one, let's do that one. And I remember there would be like an etude, it was changing strings, number 7 in Kreutzer, dim, bum, and you had to go slowly and change at the frog. And so I'd be playing it, and it'll be going okay, and then in the middle, there'll be like a string change at the frog that just slightly, I heard a middle string when I'm supposed to go from E to D. It's like, no, I'm sorry. And I was like, oh, next week. So next week I come, and I'm really tempted to put the check mark myself, to get, okay. So I come, and I'm like, I'm going to get to it. And, and I get through almost to the end. I mean, and she listened to the end of the etude. It's not like, okay, you got the idea, let's go on, you'll do it. No, she's just sitting there listening. And it's like the second to last bar. And I'm like, I made it. And then she's like, I'm sorry. I was like, no. And I remember, like, after 3 weeks or 4 weeks, when I finished that etude and I got that check, I had such... I went out for drinks. I mean, I was like, I'm done with this Kreutzer etude, yes. Next. And that's the way it was. I mean, that's how we covered etudes. It wasn't like, more or less you got the idea, you should go on. And she had the patience for that. And that is something
even Shkolnikova, she would sit there and she would listen to all of them. And if for whatever reason you weren't concentrating and you didn't play repeat, she would realize you didn't repeat that measure. And
I mean, for the open strings, the third week, I mean, my bow was shaking, and I was playing open strings, and I was nervous. I wanted to do well. I mean, it was open strings, and she's like, "Why is your bow shaking? It's open strings." I'm like, I don't know. Do you have psychological problems? And I was like, oh no. It was after that, my bow, I realized how to control the bow so it wouldn't shake and other things. Yeah.
When I entered IU, actually, I could play. So she was like, Elliot, we can just do repertoire and we don't really need to do etudes. But then I said, no, professor, I really, really want, because I felt in myself that I didn't really know how to play the violin. And so she agreed. And with me, she did she didn't do all Kreutzer, but she started with Kreutzer 2, and then a couple of Kreutzer, and then actually she went very quickly to Dont. But she had these methods, like great method, and that's something that I still use. It's like a bit faster, but you go through all the bow strokes, and then of course our dear Schradik, how she would teach that. But what I want to say about the etudes, and it's because, when people, sometimes I'm in a jury of technical exams, and then I hear etudes, and they're played like etudes. Very good, but ugly, boring, And actually, even Kreutzer number 1 or number 2, it depends on the edition, when she was playing it, and she was playing it in her own variations, she was having 4, ta, 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 upper half, then lower half, then whole bow, and then a combination. So it's kind of boring, but she would play it so beautiful. And why? Because she wanted us to have a perfect détaché. And she was actually proving that, what's the character of a nice détaché? It shouldn't be, you don't want to speed of the bow. Yeah? By the way, when I was speeding of the bow, she would say, don't jerk off. And I was like, okay. But okay. So I was like, okay. No, but she wanted everywhere the same speed. And she was very, very, very severe on that, because basically the result had to be a singing, beautiful, free movement to have a free sound. And every etude that she would take, it had always a musical purpose, really, always a musical purpose. Actually, the Kreutzer etudes are quite nice if you understand the musical purpose. And she would work on the technique, not for the technique, but for the right character, because every bow stroke has its own character. That's what I understood from her. And the character would be, if you could do it really well, and she could do it really well, everything would be so beautiful, but with a lot of personality, but beautiful.
She looked at every student individually and pursued her teaching style to that particular student. For me also, I spent 2 years playing etudes, open strings, etudes, and scales, Schradik. For me personally, and it was at first was so difficult and very stressful, and I would spend 4 hours a day I remember meeting Masha and David. That was year 1999. I would knock on their practice room. Can you help me? I don't understand.
No, but we came, so we were all slightly overlapped at different times.
Yes.
And it was funny because when the newcomers came in, they were so worried after the first week. We're like, don't worry, join the club. And, we tried to reassure everyone.
They tried to help me, but it took me actually 2 years. And for that, it was when you're older and I started over. I was 18 years old. My bones and my body is already matured, and so when you start over, it's very hard to change. I played before more with my wrist, and here I have to change everything. So it required a lot of patience and really really hard work. But I needed the 2 years, and her approach was very very smart. And every etude served this purpose. And she'll explain to me, like Kreutzer number 2, these variations, this is for bow changes, and this is for different techniques of the bow. For example, number 7, Kreutzer, right? The one that you skip a string, this is where you prepare your elbow, and you change right at the frog. You catch it, and you go down, okay? For number 3, which one is 13?
It depends on the edition. Yeah, it depends on the edition.
And also depends on the etude. Some etudes she wanted to and also depends on the student. If the student needed to do the whole etude, she would make them play the whole etude. But she sometimes I would get 3 or 4 lines because that's enough to get the idea, to learn the skill, develop the skill, and move on. One of my favorite etudes is number 37, and because the way she plays chords, nobody plays chords. And that etude 37 also, I only learned first 4 lines. And I teach my students also the same first 4 lines. But you kind of get the idea, and then I remember being stuck on this etude for 2 or 3 months, and my kids now also get stuck 2 or 3 months on it. Because to get it just right, to get this special sound, it's a skill. Because I realized something as I got older. She gave us all these rules, but for this particular etude, you have to break rules. Because then all of a sudden you hold the bow, you don't put weight of your arm, right? You hold the bow to set it up for it. Anyway, that's what I mean.
For the right hand, for example, there were many things that we were all talking about together. Turning the key, that was always her analogy. Turn the key, pronating the forearm. Understanding the angles, weight of the arm, of course, was a big thing. But just understanding like a doctor how every muscle works and what you need. So it was just analyzing each function of each muscle, she loved to use initial impulse. Another piece she loved to give was Ries, the moto perpetuo, perpetual movement, to play sautille and spiccato. So everything was understanding how everything would function, but really kind of almost medically.
Yeah, I actually had the impression that I discovered like 100 new bones and muscles in my arm after studying with her. Yeah.
Actually, about turning the key, I went to study with Nelli as a master student. I only had 2 years to study with her, so she couldn't stay with me on a lot of scales and open strings. So she thought half a year would do it. Scales. So I did most of this work that you guys say with Zinaida Gilels before entering into Nelli's studio. So that's why she thought, okay, just half a year would be fine. Let's start. Kreutzer 1. Again, Kreutzer 1. No. So we did it really, really quickly. And with me, actually, she was always extremely nice. I heard all of these stories and people getting really nervous into her class and get scared of her. I never was, because I was already 25 when I entered in her studio. And in my second year of master, I already had a job somewhere, so I felt like I'm an adult here. And she talks to me like an adult, so I feel good. And I was like prepared all the time for class and was always coming with questions. Instead of her leading the class, I tried to come with questions. And then at the end of my second year, maybe 2 months before the final recital, she started to push on me, like psychologically push, like and say me all of this thing. No, it's not good. That's worse. That's just horrible. And just like, why is she speaking to me like this? And I'm going to cry. I'm going to cry. I'm going to cry. Don't cry, Oksana. Don't cry. You're adult. You're already a master student. You can't just cry. And I'm like, And then, the lesson was over, and then towards the recital, she would become gentler and gentler to me. So when I played the recital, it's already better. And then when I played the recital, it was definitely on a going up feeling. So I played that way. And what I analyzing her probably psychological strategy with me, I thought, I actually can't remember if she said it or I just realized that it always we're going down and up. We play bad. When we play really good, we think we play really good. It's actually a bad sign.
Yeah.
I need to feel that I play bad to be able to improve. So she really made me feel like that. So when I was on the lifting up moment, improving, this is when I played the concert. It was the best point. I couldn't believe I was so prepared. I was not scared of stopping, of playing without score, which I had before that, before coming to Nelli. And with her, I learned not to be scared of that. And was just really feeling so extremely prepared. So, like this you prepare to the competitions. I see now. So it was like a psychological strategy I saw.
Yeah, definitely. I think psychologically, we all, after going through this, we feel like we can handle anything.
If I can look about Nelli's, she was actually always very nice. I thought she had a really, really good heart. You could understand that, she wanted something from you and that you become a good violinist. I mean, that was really her job. And when she would start, actually, I think she always succeeded. And that's what I saw around me. Everybody that would start with her, even if they would be weak, because sometimes she would accept weaker students, they would get to a level where they really can play very well the violin. But I want to tell you one little anecdote about sometimes how she was communicating. One time I said to Nelli, professor, I would call her professor, I really want to be free when I play. I want to be completely relaxed. And then she said, go to your bed. So that was like, okay. From that moment I understood, you can't be completely relaxed. It's all about the balance. But, it was just a few words and you understood it. Then another thing that I wanted to say is, okay, Yuri, after 2 years, you got it. Yeah? I studied, I think, 2.5 years with Nelli. And I got a lot, but I didn't get everything, honestly. And I have the feeling only after, when I was teaching myself and when I was playing, little by little, it was still in my subconscious, everything what she was saying. And many things became more natural. So it's not always mathematical, It comes, and then once you get it, you're like, oh yeah, that's an amazing feeling. But then sometimes you forget the feeling, you have to get into it again. And then the third thing that I want to say, and then I'm not going to talk anymore, the reaction sometimes, I heard that she would be sometimes very angry. She could be a little bit nasty sometimes. My worst experience with Nelli was, I was playing, and then she was like, she was really, really in a bad mood, she was not happy, obviously, but she didn't really shout, but she was, and I really thought that she was going to get a heart attack. I was very, very worried. And this lasted for, a couple of minutes. And then she would, and she would stay like that for another couple of minutes. And I'm like, I was almost peeing in my pants. And then she would, okay, let's start from the top.
She was probably over analyzing everything you're doing, and was not happy with some things. And
yeah, and I would also second that. Years, it took me years probably. Well, I had a lot of catching up to do leading up to coming to Bloomington, but already had 2 years of open strings with a wonderful teacher, Yulia Bushkova, who was teaching at my high school at the Interlochen Arts Academy. I don't know if you know the school. It's a great school. So, it was sort of a great follow-up among the same lines of Russian violin school playing. But no structure prior to that. So up till probably age 15, my teachers we lived in a time of post-Soviet Union when teachers would be kind of immigrating, and I didn't have a lot of consistency in terms of like actual structure and violin playing terms. So that was really great, but of course it was very difficult. And then Nelli took a sabbatical after like 1 year of me being there, kind of a hectic year, and then her student came in, and we were all sort of spread out in different. Were you there? Were you guys still there?
Well,
yeah, you were there. You were there.
She
Yeah.
took a sabbatical.
Yeah, so we were with different teachers, and then came in back to the studio after she came back. So, but yeah, it took also years. But again, I think her approach, using sufficiently the muscles you need and the arm weight and so on, it was really the only way I figured out how to play the violin after having to catch up so much. So I'm very, very lucky.
And I just want to say there's also a reason I feel that we all feel so good about playing the violin, but we all also feel like a family, because there was just such a wonderful atmosphere she created also between us, because she would cook so well. Every Thanksgiving, and we are a lot of international students, and so a lot of us couldn't go back to places when everyone would go on Thanksgiving. So she would every year make Thanksgiving dinner for us, and it was really, she was a perfectionist when she cooked as well. But everything. I remember it was she wanted all the students to be happy, and sometimes there would be some American students there, and she felt really bad because she said, "I know that they can't, it's America and they can't drink alcohol, because some of them are under 21. So don't worry, I didn't get alcohol. I just got them some beer because alcohol was considered something else. But she wanted everyone to be happy, and she took care of us. If someone was sick, she would drive them to the doctor. If someone, I remember Polina, she didn't have a place to sleep, so Nelli would go to Walmart. It's like, here's a mattress. Here, I got you a futon. Like, she would take care of us really like she was our second mom there. And so she was looking after, and I think that's also a reason why we connect so much together as human beings.
25 years later.
25 years, we're still a family.
We're still
we were her kids. We were her children.
Kids, and she couldn't have kids at the time. A soloist could not have kids because you couldn't have a solo career and have kids. It was just not what you were allowed to do. But that's also why we created this academy, because we all teach ourselves, and we wanted to share this school and these traditions, with you guys, so what we have learned, and it continues. And then if you're teaching, you continue that as well. And we think that's a really good idea.
I think it's important to talk a little bit about Nelli's technique, really, some things that for me were completely new. And one of them was, for example, many teachers, when you go to the tip, they say, play with flat hair. But what happens when you play with flat hair? You're going to start doing this. And when you look at the violin, even if your violin is parallel with the ground, that's what Nelli wanted, you're going to see that the strings go down. From the bridge, it goes a little bit down. So if you really want to play with all the hair, that's Nelli who said, you have also to incline your bow a little bit, even at the tip. Don't play like that. So that was one little thing that basically all my other teachers told me the contrary. But she showed it to me, and I think, and I teach still like that because I believe that she's right. Then another thing that's very typical for Nelli is put your thumb in the right place. It's maybe difficult to explain here, but it should be quite deep, so that when you do like that, that you see still the tip of your thumb.
It's not like the nail touching, but you have flesh on your thumb, so you see a bit of flesh, like as if this were the bow. So you would see a little bit of flesh on the other side, so it wouldn't be this kind of grip. Because that way it also can turn right and left, you need this movement as well. So not just like a rigid thumb grip. And after can I continue about technique thing? Or you want to talk about thumb?
No, thumb is exactly right. I teach all my students the thumb, and the thumb has to go on the leather, not in the frog.
Not in the frog, not like...
Not in the spot in between the leather and the frog.
But this would come from Yankelevich, her teacher, who there's also his writings which are available in English. now, but he talks about this in great detail too. So that was from Yankelevich.
And another very unique technique is how to play chords. I don't know, yeah? And I spent a few months on that with her. Super slowly. I think it was Don't Etude number 1.
Yeah. Of course.
And the idea is that to play a 3-note chord properly without a big accent, that you have to not start from the string, but you have to start from just tiny bit above the string, like 1 millimeter above the string, and drop your arm, drop the elbow. So you don't smack the strings, but the bow lands on the strings like at an angle, like airplane on a runway. So it's a rounder, smoother sound.
Speaking of airplanes on the runway, shifting was also something that she spoke about a lot, and which also came from Yankelevich. The idea of starting every single shift slowly, not starting fast and slowing down, which some teachers I've heard do, but the opposite. You start slowly, like an airplane taking off, and then it accelerates and gets lighter, and that finger is the lower finger. If you're going to an upper finger, that lower finger goes into the air. So it doesn't stop at the intermediary note. And you don't hear that. It just starts slowly and goes somewhere there, and the other finger comes down. And that slow beginning, which I think is so crucial, and it's sometimes counterintuitive because we want to quickly get through that shift, but to know that the note before the shift has to be played fully and start slowly, that is really something that helps shifting. And I say to all my students, and I think that's really, really important.
I worked on that with a student this morning, so I think it's definitely something.
Same here. I think the chords, it's quite amazing because most of us think 3 chords with 3 strings. Let's try to take the 3 strings together, but that's absolutely not what Nelli wanted. But look, she had many little things like that really changed my way of thinking about the violin technologically. But if you can play a beautiful chord or a beautiful spiccato, because she was very good in spiccato. She was like really the queen of spiccato. I think in the Soviet Union, she was basically the best spiccato of all violinists. It was Nelli Shkolnikova. But again, most of teachers, they say spiccato is with the wrist, but Nelli, not at all. It comes from here and the right spot, and it should be like détaché, should almost have no difference in technologically with spiccato, but if you do it the right way, the right space, then it's going to jump by itself. That's also why I went to Bloomington, is to learn spiccato. Now, but look, she was the queen of the spiccato. She was the queen of the chords. She was the queen of the legato. She was the queen of the martelé, marcato, actually, also. Legato. She was just the queen of everything. And she did all these techniques so beautifully that it became artistry. And that's absolutely amazing. I thought that's really it completely changed my way of also listening to other violinists, actually, of playing my ideals of, I'd like to play like Nelli, basically. I always wanted and I still want. It's very tough. Very tough.
I was just thinking, we were talking earlier about how it takes time to assimilate a lot of things. At first, I think many of us, or many others that I've spoken to, maybe thought that it was only about technique. That because she would only talk about technique, and however, very quickly we realized that actually she was never talking about technique. She was always talking about music and always talking about beauty and artistry. It's just she had to say it in technical ways so that you could understand it. But always the goal, and that was always obvious, was that it had to be beautiful. And so, in order for it to be beautiful, you have to, have a good technique, but it was never, that's why when she said, it's good, but it's all wrong, because if she were a teacher that, just, okay, it's fine as long as it's in tune and rhythm and whatever, however way you do it, technique for technique. There are unfortunately so many violinists today that, that play just technique for technique. It just has to be crystal clear and no matter how you do it. And she would never accept that. It would always have to be first beautiful, and in order for it to be beautiful, you have to have a proper technique.
We had weekly lessons, and she wouldn't be shy to give more lessons if necessary. She would also organize quite a lot of studio classes. And one thing, and because I think it's very, it's basically on stage that you understand if you practiced well or not, And to have this experience on stage, it's crucial before an important recital and all that. So she would absolutely use this. And what she even did is a kind of a studio class, but with scales. And that was quite very frightening. And she had like a paper. I still have a scan of the paper where there's like right hand, because in scales there was a lot of right hands, number of string crossing, speed of the ball. They had like 4 things, and in left hand there were 6 things. So the routine, basically, she would basically, if you would have a problem in a piece, she would like to go to an etude and then fix the problem, and then she was. I mean, if she would give you an exercise very quickly, you had to achieve this level, to go to the next. Well, someone wants to say something?
Any other questions?
Basically, it was not a camp; it was a college. So some people had classes. Other people, like if you did undergrad, you had a lot of classes. If you did like a diploma, you had only lessons and orchestra or stuff like that. But it was Bloomington is a college town, so we had not so many distractions from practicing and studying. So a lot of time, I remember myself, I would sit and practice for the whole evenings, like from 6 to midnight or something like that. I spent a lot of time practicing at those years, and weekly lessons, and a lot of times she gave me extra lessons. I remember one summer I was staying in Bloomington. She told me to come practice at her house in the basement. So I would go and practice every day at her house, and she would come down once in a while and tell me something, do this, do that. And that summer I played Paganini concerto with the Sarah Cadenza.
I remember.
That was quite.
And
I'm not a Paganini player. I don't like Paganini. I can't play Paganini, but that was like I worked really hard to try to get it.
And I wanted to share an advice on if you're ever anxious about memorization, right, or afraid to have a memory slip. She had a specific advice that she would tell us. It's before you go to sleep. Let's say like if you're worried about a specific passage or even the entire piece, because she had an incident when she was young in Russia. It was quite tough for performers, because if you have like a thing that happens to you during the performance, it's almost like someone puts like a cross over your entire career. So they're pretty tough. So she said, don't take the violin, and don't move your fingers, just visualize everything. Don't sing. You have to run through the entire piece, and you have to visualize you're doing everything, but you're not allowed to like move or look at the music or any of that stuff. So if you can get through it very clearly, then you know it.
But you know what she pushed? She pushed for memorizing things in pieces in many different ways. Not just your muscle memory, but your head,
right.
Knowing.
Yes, this idea about trying to play in your head without moving your fingers, it's actually a very powerful technique, because when we learn stuff physically with muscle memory, and we don't necessarily know the music in our head, it's just muscle memory. So a lot of times when you make a mistake, you don't know how to recover, because you just remember a sequence of movements, and if there is a glitch, you did something wrong, you shifted to wrong finger, whatever, you don't know what comes next because the sequence is interrupted. So the idea was to try to play in your head first with music. Like I wouldn't be able to do it without music, so I would sit with music and try to go like bar by bar, and if I couldn't remember what's the next note, I would look and start again, just playing in your head, trying to visualize what you do with your hands, with both hands, without moving anything. Just close your eyes, kind of like like you're sleeping. But that's super, super useful. And you should actually try it when you're preparing for a recital or whatever, trying to memorize a piece. Try to play it in your head without the instrument. It will improve the memorization like
You won't have a, if
tenfold.
you can play it through, you won't have a memory slip, basically.
I just want to add that it really does help, but if you have a whole concerto to play, and sometimes when I have a concert, I do it, but I always fall asleep before the end of the concert. It's very tiring. It's very tiring.
That happened. We should wrap it up, probably, right?
Yeah. I should wrap it up.
I mean, well, thank you. It's actually we didn't really have a format for this. So we would just get together and talk about Nelli, and it just happened. And it's just so wonderful to be here with all of you, because we hear the same things but said in different ways. And that's what I feel these 10 days here about. Is like I sometimes feel I'm teaching the same lesson every time, but in different ways, and I think that's what I've had some feedback from people, that they're getting also hearing the same things in different ways, because these are things that have worked for us and that we feel is really important, and we feel it's really important to share. So I just want to thank you guys. I'm happy that we're doing this.
Thank you, Damasha,
and as a team effort. Thank you.
Okay, now go practice.